Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, and you are listening or watching to the More Insights and Strategy podcast. I'm here with a very special guest from Zoho, Raju Vegesna. I will get your name right one of these days. I'm so sorry. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for having me again.
It's been a great series. We talked about surveillance, otherwise known as privacy. Surveillance is just such more of a meaningful term here, and I think I might start using that as opposed to privacy. But we talked about consumer privacy from the consumer point of view. We talked about business privacy, where certain business applications are actually soaking up information about consumers and also about even employees on that. But what I'd like to talk about now is this notion of adjunct privacy. And I don't know if you define this term, Raju. I think there may have been a couple other folks who talked about this, but what is adjunct privacy?
Sure. Yeah, I wrote about it internally within the company, probably maybe a year back or so. So let me explain the difference. With consumer privacy or surveillance, where you're using a service like a Gmail or some other service, and you're being surveilled. You're being tracked on whatever you're doing. In the context of business, there are enough companies out there tracking you, but in the context of business, to build your profile and all of that. Adjunct surveillance is about surveillance in adjunct properties. For example, if you're using something like a Gmail or a Google search and all of that, you as a consumer know that you're paying for that service with your data. But when you visit a website, like any business vendor's website, be it an Oracle.com or a Salesforce or an SAP or any of these websites out there, what's happening is you're still being surveilled by the same surveillance companies, like consumer surveillance companies, without your knowledge. So the concept of surveillance companies collecting information about you from adjunct properties without your knowledge, that is the tricky part.
That sounds like against the law or something, right?
It should be, right? You would think it is, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. And across domains, you would think it is only the case with digital technologies out there. No. I mean, can we guarantee that the surveillance companies are not buying your telephone records from service providers? Some things have been recently exposed. For example, I think Google was buying healthcare data from a healthcare provider recently, right? And a ton of data. It is our data that belongs to you and me, that is purchased by Google from a healthcare provider without our permission. That shouldn't be legal in the first place, right? Similarly, that is the healthcare data. Another important thing is financial data. The transactions that we do on our credit cards, that transaction information is being sold to Google at a price without our permission. So all of these transactions are happening from adjunct properties, and that information is flowing freely to surveillance companies without our permission. And we have zero control on this. And they're using our information without our permission to target ads at us. And this has gotten out of hand.
Interesting. Is this the same reason that if I do a search on Amazon for a product and it follows me around, or is that just plain old cookie-based tracking? Is that adjunct? Where
that is plain old cookie-based, probably. But let's say you visited Home Depot today, and maybe you watched a show called Shark Tank, and you see an ad that is related to maybe both on your thing, then that would be adjunct, because it is likely that some information, like either service providers or through through your so-called smart speakers that know that your watch Shark Tank is passing that information to surveillance companies on one side, and then your location information, be it your operating system or other location sharing applications, sharing your location data to the surveillance companies, and somebody is compiling that information and allowing you to run ads. To understand what kind of surveillance is going on, it will be good to look at the other side of the window and say, what's going on? So if you try targeting and running a targeted ad against something, you will notice that you can do it based on someone watching a particular TV show or someone visiting a particular store and maybe a couple of other criteria, and then you can do an ad, which means all this information is aggregated almost on a real-time basis and is used for targeting users.
Yeah, so you talked about, you gave a retail example. I think we talked about credit cards. But please tell me this isn't happening in healthcare.
It is happening in healthcare, absolutely.
Like what? Give me an example. What do you mean? Like I broke my leg and I went to the hospital, and the hospital sells data to Google or something,
including your test results. Recently, somebody uncovered this information that Google was purchasing this data from, I don't remember the exact name, from one of the two or three data providers out there. So they likely have your test data for all the tests that you may have had on the healthcare side, and that is being used. I'm sure that is being used for targeting.
I'm so shocked. I forgot you told me that in the first place. So my apologies. But I was thinking that we have laws like that in the United States. It's funny, in the United States, you always think, oh, it's in some other country that happens, right? But it ends up being true, because that's like in Ghostbusters, where you don't cross the streams. When it comes to healthcare and data privacy, I mean, I served as chairman of the board of Austin's biggest hospital, and going through audits of security. I know I wasn't knowingly selling any data. I hope we weren't, but we'll have to see. So, what is it that Zoho's doing in order to kind of rise above adjunct surveillance?
Because we play in the B2B sector, in the context of B2B, we are blocking all third-party surveillance from all our properties. You will not find a Google Analytics embedded either on our website or in our apps, around 50 apps, mobile apps to whatnot. We have gone to a large extent, to basically get rid of all third parties. Because some things you take it for granted. Let me give you an example. Take something like Google Fonts. You say, hey, I love this font, I'm going to embed it. But that's a Trojan horse. You're downloading something from Google servers. Now they know your IP address, they know everything. And that is no different than an embedded pixel that is out there. And in a lot of cases, you just take it for granted. But there are several such Trojan horses out there that you have to consciously avoid. And we are taking every step to avoid that across the board. So what our promise is, as long as our users are using or on our properties, we want to guarantee that we do not allow any third parties to track them. And of course, not to mention, we'll never sell their data to any third parties, nor will we use it for advertising.
I get it. Very simple. You're not going to sell it, and you're not going to buy it. You don't have a platform. You're not even in that business.
We're not even in the business. In a lot of cases, these B2B companies also do double dipping, where on one side you charge your customers for the services. On the other side, you take their data, sell it to someone else, and then make money that way too. All of them comes down to that greed, because again, it comes back to philosophical thing. What is the purpose of business? In our case, it's straightforward. There are two things. We want to take care of our customers and employees. There are only two aspects to it. But in a lot of businesses, there is a third one, which is investor. And the investor always wants the profits to keep going up, their investment to keep going up, which means there is a pressure, there is a quarterly treadmill, which means they have to figure out multiple or new ways to make money out of the so-called resources and assets that they have. And they lead to these things. But the problem is, there, as you keep, it's like your treadmill that constantly increases speed. There is a point where you simply will not be able to cope up.
Well, it's funny, if you built your entire business model and that's how you started, and you're viewed as a successful and smart company, because remember, data is the new oil. It is hard to get off the treadmill. And I've seen Apple's been very successful in their ability to have a very good business model without doing that. I think I used to think that B2B companies, for the most part, weren't doing it. But you've enlightened me on that part. I'm going to have to go back, and the analyst is going to have to go back and do some more research on this. But it is nice to know and refreshing that Zoho doesn't. It's just not your business model. And
the business model, and sometimes you have to say enough, where you cannot always, your revenue cannot always keep going up. Then something will break if it has to go up, right? So you should have the courage to say enough. Unfortunately, because of the financialized nature of things, a lot of companies don't say enough. I mean, take today, for example, I really like Apple and I respect Apple for their stance on privacy and whatnot. But you got to say at over $2 trillion in market cap, I look at it and say Apple's market cap is almost similar to India's GDP. So one of those numbers are wrong. So Apple, the company, is valued almost the same as India, the country with 1.3 billion people. One of those numbers are not right. And they're going to be adjusted. So no matter how good the company is, the investors, the expectations, all of those put pressure on the team in making some bad decisions. And that's how companies come down, because historically, the median or average lifespan of a company used to be about 60 years. That was in 1950s, 1960s. Now it's about 17 years. Why is that? It is because financialization and whatnot. Again, that's a whole different story. But business models matter a lot. And even in the context of surveillance and privacy, business models matter a lot in this case.
Right. Well, Raju, I think we're at the end of our time here, and I want to thank you for coming on. I feel like we're just hitting the entire scope of surveillance and privacy, and it's pretty exciting. We've gone from consumer to business to adjunct, and I think we might have a few things left. In fact, we're going to talk about sensory surveillance next. But if you liked what you heard, please press that subscribe button. We really appreciate you and our listeners. Until then, have a great night.